Their service is a part of America's history. Join us as we step into their story.
The Vietnam War was starting to heat up, and I figured, well, if I was going to get in the Army, they were going to draft me and I'd go as enlisted, I might as well go ahead and take ROTC and get a commission and perhaps go to that difficulty. So I graduated in 1963 with my degree and a commission as a second lieutenant. I was commissioned in military intelligence, but however I had to attend the infantry officer basic course at Fort Benning, Georgia at that time, and after that went up to Fort Devens, Massachusetts for some intelligence training. I had hoped that I would be able to see the world being in the Army, but my first assignment was 50 miles south of where I lived in Littleton, Colorado, at Fort Carson, where I was a platoon leader. And that was a good assignment. Good assignment because I got to be with soldiers, I got to learn. And I figured I would only serve my 2-year obligation and leave the service. But one day my battalion commander came by and he sat down and he said, "Okay, Lieutenant, what would it take for you to stay in the Army for a while?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to see the world, so how about an assignment in Europe?" He said, "I'll see what I can do." So about 2 weeks later, I get a call from his adjutant that says, "Lieutenant, the colonel asked me to call you to tell you that you're going to Germany. You'll have orders within the next week." And sure enough, my orders arrived, and off I went to Germany for a 3-year tour, which was really good. I was then into an intelligence operation over there, and my first assignment was the training officer for the battalion. So I got to learn a lot about soldiers and their training cycles and their training requirements. But then I became a company commander, and I had about 400 soldiers in my company. Learned a great deal about leadership. My company first sergeant was a really fine NCO. I learned a lot from him. And later throughout life, he and I stayed in touch, as did my family. 3 years came up, and I got orders to go to Vietnam. The Army said, "Well, you've served your obligation. You can leave if you like." And I thought, well, going back to the United States, I don't have a job lined up, so I might as well see the other half of the world. So off I went to Vietnam, and I ended up being an advisor in a little island off the coast away, which was about 3 kilometers wide at its widest, 18 kilometers long, and about 300-400 yards as the nearest point to the mainland. Our job out there was to disrupt the BC's supply line running from north to south. North of us was the DMZ and south was Da Nang. So we regularly had operations out there. I went to Europe to headquarters NATO, and I was a special security officer for the delegation there. A very fine assignment because I got to learn a lot about NATO. I got to meet a lot of senior leadership. I was the SSO for the 4-star, the 3-star Navy Admiral, the ambassador, and several other high-ranking persons in Brussels. And I went into the Army Reserves at that time. And I was there for a few years, and in 1985, the Adjutant General of Texas asked me to go into the National Guard there. They needed a qualified military intelligence officer because of a change in the way they were going to be structured. I served 3.5 years as the G2 of the division, later assignments as the Chief of Staff of the division, Assistant Division Commander, and then the Division Commander. In 1998, when I took command, I immediately was told the division is going to Bosnia in the peacekeeping operation. The Army had decided that Bosnia mission was wearing the Army out because it would take 2 or 3 brigades to fill out a full brigade to go to Bosnia. Chief of Staff of the divisions, or the Chief of Staff of the Army said, if we're to give this mission to the National Guard, which division would it be? So some of the advisors to the TRADOC commander, 5th Army commander, and 1st Army commander said, all right, which division? Their recommendation was the 49th Armored Division. We took command in Bosnia in early March, 5th of March, as I believe it was to be. And that turned out to be probably the most challenging assignment I ever had, but probably the most rewarding. As I look back on it, all the assignments that I'd had previously in the Army helped me do the job in Bosnia. Officially, I was a NATO officer at that time. We had a lot of interesting situations arrive while we were in Bosnia. Probably one of the biggest was the women of Srebrenica. Most anybody who understands what happened there would recall that there was mass murder in Srebrenica, a small town close to the border between Bosnia and Serbia. The Serbs came across one night, and in fact they ended up slaughtering about 7,000 men and boys. They turned the women loose. After the graves were found, that's when the United States went in there. The women of Srebrenica, on the 5th anniversary of that massacre, decided that they wanted to go back to Srebrenica for a ceremony. And our job was to secure the area and not let nothing happen to them. I didn't realize it at the time, but everybody in the world was watching that. They must have been watching via satellites, because I got calls from people in Washington and elsewhere congratulating us for a successful operation. But then one morning, sitting in my living room having a cup of coffee and reading the paper, my son called and said, "Dad, are you watching the news?" And I said, "No, nice and quiet here." He said, "I think you better turn it on." That was 9/11. We had already received orders that I was to put soldiers in every airport in Texas, trained, armed, and deployed. 26 airports, to include the likes of George Bush International in Houston and DFW, as well as Austin. As small as 2 people at one of the airports that was only open 8 to 5. So for the next 5 years, I was occupied by training the next 5 National Guard division commanders and their staffs for that assignment in Bosnia and later into Kosovo, which was very satisfying because I was still able to sit down and work with soldiers, which to me was one of the greatest things that I've ever done.
America's military veterans. They wrote part of our country's history.